Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Viewers, today we are going to begin a new lecture series, which is going to be a monthly lecture series. These lectures would be based on the book Meezan, translated into English by the name Islam, a Comprehensive Introduction. As you all know, that this book has been authored by our teacher, Javed Ahmed Ghamidi. It is a book which he completed about 15 years ago, way back in 2007. This book actually is his understanding of the contents of religion. In the foreword to this book, he has explained the principles of interpreting religion, which he has formulated. Of course, he heavily relies on his two illustrious predecessors, Ustaz Hamidud Farahi and Ustaz Amin Islahi. Ustaz Amin Islahi is someone with whom he spent a lot of his life, and from 1973 onwards, right up to 1993, which is about 20 years, he spent his time studying with him the Quran and some of the very basic subjects. So his own understanding of religion, as I said, is drawn from the principles which have been formulated, enunciated by Ustaz Hamiduddin Farahi and Ustaz Amin Islahi. This lecture series would not be in the same order as the order that you can see in the book. We will take up different subjects and different topics and different chapters. So today we take up the chapter which is called the Dietary Shari'ah. And as you can see from the very name of the topic, that in this lecture, I will try to explain his viewpoint regarding the dietary laws of religion. And as far as these dietary laws are concerned, we know that there are certain basic premises that we have to understand. So inshallah, I will try to point out those principles the way he has laid them down in his book Meezan. And once again, just to let you know that this series is entirely based on his point of view. And of course, at the end of each session, you will have the opportunity to ask questions regarding these lectures. But as I said, that this would be once a month, and mostly on the third week, the third Saturday of every month. And so we begin this chapter, or we begin this discussion of the Dietary Shari'ah. Now, Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, the way he has explained this in his book, in this particular chapter, he says that as far as original guidance from the Almighty is concerned in this regard, we already have that guidance innately found in us. So externally, the Sharia was not needed to guide us. It was only needed to clarify certain issues in which human intellect could have faltered, and the Sharia guided us in those issues. Otherwise, as far as the dietary laws are concerned, what we should eat and what should we abstain from, our own human nature is the best guide. So it's our innate guidance which is the best judge in this regard. So he has actually cited the Quran. And before even citing the Quran, I think the basic principle which you can see that I have presented before you, it is my deduction of his understanding, and that is that at no place has a Sharia presented a complete list of clean edibles. When I say the word clean, of course, here it refers to wholesome and pure edibles which relate to what is permissible. And edibles, of course, include both things which are eaten and drunk. So basically, it is our own human nature, it's our own innate guidance, our inborn guidance, which is sufficient to let us know what exactly is permissible. It is our own internal mechanism which tells us that what we have to eat and what we have to abstain from. So therefore, he has cited this Quranic verse, which you can see is being displayed right before you. This is verse 5 of Surah Maida, which is the 5th surah. He says, while citing it, "Uhilla lakum at-tayyibat," all clean things are lawful to you. So the word tayyibat in Arabic has a very special connotation. Tayyibat means things which are wholesome and pure with regard to their eating. So the word clean actually is not a very accurate translation, I would say. What is meant here is things which are wholesome for eating. And as an obvious corollary to this, things which are forbidden as a result are those which are not wholesome, which are not pure and not clean. And then he says that while inviting the Jews and Christians to profess faith in Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Almighty has referred to the extremist attitude they had adopted with regard to food and drinks in the following words. And actually it has, I mean, this verse also tells us that how the prophet, how the last prophet would come, and he would actually loosen these shackles and these burdens which they had laid upon themselves, the people of the book. And the words are, وَيُحِلَّ لَهُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَيُحَرِّمُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْخَبَائِثِ وَيَدَعُ عَنْهُمْ إِسْرَهُمْ وَأَغْلَالَ الَّتِي كَانَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ. So, and this prophet allows them as lawful what is appropriate for eating. So, another translation for the word tayyibat here is appropriate for eating, what is wholesome for eating, and prohibits them from what is inappropriate for eating. He releases them from their heavy burdens and from the yokes that were upon them. So, one of the objectives of the last prophet, which this verse actually tells us, is that he will come and he will actually once again revive this concept of what is clean and what is unclean, regarding what food items and edibles we should drink. I mean, this is something which is already found in our human nature, because of perversion and distortion and some of the other innovations that had crept him, he once again revived that these are the things that people should they should know while they're drinking or while they're eating, that these are the things which are appropriate for this purpose. So what we have to understand here as a result is that it is this innate guidance, this is this inborn guidance, which tells us what we should eat and what we should not eat. Similarly, what we should drink and what we should not drink. Now, in spite of this, we find that there are certain things which the Prophet himself is supposed to have stated that they are not permissible. And Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has explicitly said that when the Prophet prohibits something, it's not that he is prohibiting that thing afresh or anew, but it is something which is already found in our human nature, already found in our innate guidance, and all that he is doing is that he is just explaining that innate guidance that we already have in ourselves. So the two things which he has in this regard proscribed are animals with sharp canine teeth and birds having claws and or tentacles in their feet. So you see that what the things which make an animal, whether it be a bird animal or a land, whether it be a bird or a land animal, or even a sea animal, is that savagery which is depicted as a result of, or its beastliness, which is depicted as a result of its sharp teeth, which are made to tear open the prey, to cut it apart, to tear it apart and eat its meat. And birds with claws and tentacles, of course, they are also of a very similar nature. You can see vultures having those tentacles and claws in which they pounce upon their prey and cut it open. So this is nothing but our own innate guidance, because from our own innate guidance, we know that lions and tigers and vultures and all these savage animals, or savage birds, I would say, or these beastly birds, we would never eat them. They never form part of our edibles. And when the Prophet said that such animals are prohibited, he was not adding something to the list of this prohibition. All that he was doing was he was explaining something that we already have in our human nature. So we have to understand that if people have added to the list by saying that there are some things which the Quran has prohibited and some other things which Hadith or the Prophet has prohibited, this would not be correct. The Prophet is just explaining what we already have in our own nature. The second thing which is on a similar basis which has been ascribed to the Prophet is the Jalala. So Jalala is an animal whose meat carries a particular stink, because it eats on certain, I would say, certain things which are inappropriate. They eat ants and certain other things which are rubbish in nature, and as a result of which their meat carries a certain stink. Now, again, that is something which is an explication of our human nature. So the bottom line is that when you find a hadith stating that these animals or these things have also been prohibited, we have to understand that the Prophet is not adding to the list of the prohibited items in eating. What he's doing is he's just delineating something that we already have in our own human nature, or something which is found already in our innate guidance. Similarly, he has also stated that as far as liquor is concerned, alcohol is concerned, this is also something which is whose prohibition is found in our human nature. And the reason that alcohol is prohibited and our own innate guidance vouches for that is that this is something when we consume in a certain amount, it makes us lose our senses and it makes us lose our faculty of intellect, which is the greatest asset which the Almighty has given us. And while clarifying this innate guidance that we already have, when the Quran states that liquor is also forbidden and it's like a handiwork of Satan and we should abstain from it, again we have to understand that the Quran also, when it states the prohibition of liquor in these stern words, is not making a new list of things, as we said earlier on. The Quran does not give you a list of prohibited items in general, because these are the things that we already find divinely ordained in our nature. So whether it is jalala or whether it is animals which have sharp canine teeth, or birds which have claws and tentacles, or whether it is this prohibition of liquor, which is of course also found in the Quran, these are basically things which our innate guidance has prohibited. And as now we come to the fact that what exactly does the Quran do? If we know that these items are found in our human nature which have been prohibited, and the Prophet and the Quran also has at times explained them, then what exactly has the Quran done regarding this innate guidance, or regarding the prohibition, I would say, of edibles? So in this regard, as I said before I answer this question, the way Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has answered it in his book, what we need to understand is that the Shari'ah which is given to humankind, to mankind, is extremely brief. The basic premise is that in most things we ourselves are capable in finding the right path. Our intellect, our own nature, our own conscience have a lot of power in them. They have the capacity given to them by the Almighty to find the right path. So the Sharia only interferes or only guides us where our innate guidance or our own intellect tends to fall short, and it would get confused or maybe doesn't get a concrete answer in this regard. So precisely this has happened in the case of the dietary Sharia as well. So there were 4 things about which human intellect could not have decided whether they should go about consuming these things or not. So what the Quran has done here is that it has actually guided humankind in these 4 affairs. So this is very important to understand. And it's not that the Quran is giving some guidance because it was giving some original guidance in this regard, as we said, because as far as original guidance in edibles is concerned, we know what we have to eat and what we don't eat, and human instincts over the centuries have borne witness to it. It is only in areas where we might falter that the Sharia guides us in general, and in this regard also it has done the same thing. So there were 4 things about which there was a chance that we would wrongly interpret, or maybe we would be in a confusion as to which path we should follow. So it is in these 4 things which the Quran has guided us. And these 4 things, as you can see, are now being displayed before you in the form of a Quranic verse. This is verse 145 of Surah Anam. So the words are, قُلْ لَا أَجِدُ فِي مَا أُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ مُحَرَّمًا عَلَى طَاعِمٍ يَطْعَمُهُ إِلَّا أَن يَكُونَ مَيْتَةً أَوْ دَمًا مَسْفُوحًا أَوْ لَحْمَ خِنْزِيرٍ فَإِنَّهُ رِجْسٌ أَوْ فِسْقٌ أُحِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ فَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Now this is the verse actually which occurs thrice in the Quran with slight variation of words, and on all these 3 occasions it guides us that, well, human intellect could have faltered regarding 4 areas, and therefore the Almighty has given us revealed and divine guidance in this matter. So let me just translate this verse before you first. Say, I find not in what has been revealed to me through inspiration forbidden to a person who eats things which are edible, unless it be meat of dead animals. So the first thing which has been prohibited and about which people could have faltered whether they should eat it or not, because of course when an animal dies, the question could have arisen, well, if the animal was alive, we would have easily eaten it, and why should we not eat it if the animal has passed away? Or if we should not eat it, or we should eat it, the question could have caused some confusion. So the first thing in which the Quran has given its verdict is that when the animal which is allowed to you, which is permissible to you, passes away, it dies, then it is no longer worthy of being consumed. We'll see the reasoning behind that, but let's first see what the verse tells us. So this is the first thing. The second thing is the thing, or blood which is poured forth, which is daman masfuhan, as you can see. Blood which is poured forth means that the blood, when you slaughter an animal, it comes out, and of course that is something which is forbidden, implying the fact, yes, that when you slaughter an animal, some part of that blood might remain in the veins and arteries of that animal. So if that is consumed with its meat, then that is not something which is prohibited. But the blood which gushes out when you slaughter that animal, of course, it flows in the form of a gushing torrent. That also is forbidden. So the first thing was meat of a dead animal, and in the Quran, the term used for a dead animal is maita. Maita means the dead, a dead animal here. And the second thing which has been prohibited is blood poured forth, which is daman masfuhan. And then the third thing which has been prohibited, as this verse tells us, or the flesh of swine, the flesh of the swine, because all these are unclean or in disobedience to Allah. So the verse actually then says that these are unclean, again, meaning that they are inappropriate to be consumed. So, and then before going on to the fourth thing, it is actually juxtaposed between the first three things and the fourth thing, that these are unclean. So the words used are فَإِنَّهُ رِجْسًا أَوْ فِسْقًا. So they are unclean or they are in disobedience to God. And then it is said animals slaughtered in someone else's name. So the things which are unclean or in disobedience to God. And the fourth thing here, which is stated, is that animals which are slaughtered in someone else's name, which means that they are not slaughtered by pronouncing the name of God. So we know that this action or this act of pronouncing the name of God at the time of slaughtering an animal is called tasmiyah. Tasmiyah means to take the name of God, to pronounce the name of God. So the verse tells us that the fourth thing which the Almighty has given his decision on is that if an animal is slaughtered such that someone else's name is taken at the time of slaughter, I mean, other than Allah, other than that of God, then that is also forbidden. So these are the four things. We will go into detail regarding each of these four things, but then we have to understand that this is the list of things which the Quran has given its verdict regarding which, and of course, the reason being that human intellect could have gone wrong in this direction. And the verse actually ends by telling us and by advising people that in spite of the things that they have been mentioned, which are completely proscribed, completely prohibited, in exceptional circumstances in which a person is pushed, in compelling circumstances, even they can be consumed. So the words are, then he who is constrained by hunger, such that he neither desires to eat nor crosses the limits, incurs no sin. So if a person is forced to hunger, he is in compelling circumstances, if he eats either of these four things, all four of them, and his purpose is not that he desires these things, and his purpose is also not that he crosses the limit, neither does he have a craving for these things, nor if he is able to just eat enough for himself so that he could maintain being alive, he does not cross the limit and starts enjoying them. So the Quran tells us that this concession is there, and a person who benefits from this concession, he consumes all these prohibited items when he's compelled and he is in a state of compulsion, then he incurs no sin. This is because your Lord is forgiving and merciful. Again, the Almighty making it clear to us that in spite of the fact that these four things are some things that we should never ever consume in normal circumstances because of their inappropriate nature, but they could be compelling circumstances. This again, subhanAllah, is a beautiful a picture that emerges of our Sharia, of the law of God regarding edibles. And if we read this law in the light of the people of the book, the way the Sharia has been enshrined for them, especially how it has been interpreted by their jurists, where it has become extremely difficult to stay within limits and also consume what they have prescribed. In the backdrop of that, if we are told that even in cases of compelling circumstances, we can consume these prohibited things as long as we are not desiring them and as long as we are not crossing our limits, this is something which would be okay. This tells us how flexible the Sharia is in this regard even. So now let us take up all these four things one by one, because there are certain details we have to understand. That why is it that these things are prohibited? What exactly is the philosophy behind their prohibition? So taking them now in order one by one. The first thing that has been prohibited is maita. Now, the reason why maita, or the meat of a dead animal, is disallowed is once an animal dies, of course, there is blood in his veins. And if you start consuming that, there is this possibility that you will also consume the blood which is found in him. And a person who consumes blood, of course, is a person who we look upon as a person who is a savage. A person who would consume blood is someone who is more akin to a beast. So the bottom line here is that we have to understand is that the things that we eat, they have an influence on our lives. And this is something which the Quran tells us, and of course modern scientific facts also corroborate it, that the things that we eat have a very important and a very potent effect on our lives and on the way that we spend them. So it has prohibited carnivores, meat-eating animals, which tear apart their prey, or they cut apart their prey through their tentacles or through their canine teeth, and because this is mere savagery. And if you follow them in this regard, we eat such animals which are beasts, then that beastliness is also there's a chance that it gets transferred to people who consume them. So we have to understand that as far as maita is concerned, or the meat of a dead animal is concerned, it is prohibited because of the presence of blood in that dead animal, and blood itself is something which can only be consumed if a person becomes a beast or if he becomes a savage. At one place, the Quran has actually also explained some of the forms of a dead animal, because a person could have said, well, what if an animal does not die of its natural death? It could be other instances as well in which death has occurred. So this is what the Quran also does, that it at times explains its original directive. So it said that dead animals are prohibited, and then it went on to explain what those dead animals are, or the nature of that death, as far as an animal is concerned, in verse 3 of Surah Maida, so that there could be no confusion that whatever the reason that the animal has died has to be taken into account. So I'm just going to read that part before you. This is the third verse of Surah Maida. It says, حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَيْتَةُ وَالدَّمُ وَلَحْمُ الْخِنْزِيرِ وَمَا أُحِلَّ لِغَيْرِ اللَّهِ بِهِ. So exactly the four things which we just discussed earlier on. This verse repeats those four things. Maita, dam, maita is dead animal, dam is blood, lahm al-khinzir is the meat of the swine, and wama uhilla li ghayrillahi bihi is, of course, any animal which is slaughtered in someone else's name other than God. So this is the same. These are the four items or entities which have been just pronounced here once again. But here, what the Quran has done, it has actually given us some more description regarding maita. So it says that forbidden to you for food are meat of dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine, and that on which Allah's name has not been invoked while slaughtering. Now comes that part which is an explanation of the word maita. And that which has been killed by strangling, or by a violent blow, or by a headlong fall, or by the goring of horns, and that which has been eaten by a wild animal, unless you are able to slaughter it before its death. So, keeping in view some of the questions that might have arisen, the Quran has further explained that if an animal does not die its natural death, it could be killed by strangling. You just strangle that animal and you just take its life, and then it could be through a violent blow, and then of course it could be by the goring of horns or of a headlong fall. Even all these things, whatever the reason could be, the Quran says that if an animal dies because of these, then it has to be classified as maita. And also, lastly, it says that that which is eaten by a wild animal, unless, that wild animal has preserved that, and you are able to slaughter it before it dies. So, if that is the case, then it shall not be regarded as maita, and it could be consumed. And there are certain conditions also which come later. That consumption is that you have slaughtered the animal if it has been found alive, and the animal which has actually hunted for that has not consumed it for itself. It has preserved it for its master. So this is some of the explanation of the word maita. And one more thing which we have to understand here is, you see, In the Arabic language, words are used on the basis of their usage. They are not used on the basis of their meaning or their root meaning in the dictionary. This is something which is extremely important to realize, that in language, the real thing is the usage of that word and not its literal meaning. Because you see, what happens is that meanings, they travel and they become stripped of some of its original connotations, and then they are meant for specific entities. So this is a very important principle of the Arabic language. So keeping in mind this particular principle, there is an exception in the Arabic language, and that is when the word maita is spoken. As you can see from the scholars' works, all linguistic scholars of Arabic, they endorse this, that fish or locust, when they die, they are not classified as maita, because the usage of is such that in Arabic language, if a fish is dead, it's never called maita. Similarly, locust, when it is dead, it is never called maita. So therefore, if we consume dead fish and if we consume dead locust, it would be absolutely fine, because they do not come under maita. And this is something which is extremely important, which Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has pointed out, that linguistic usage is so important that, well, as far as being dead is concerned, a fish is dead if it's dead, and a locust is dead if it's dead, and every dead animal has been prohibited. That would be the reasoning but a simple person would follow in this regard, but not in case of Arabic linguistics. We have to understand that when people who are classical speakers of the language, they create exceptions, we have to accept those exceptions. So when the word maita is spoken of, it cannot be classified, it cannot be spoken of dead fish, even though it's dead. It similarly cannot be spoken of locust, even though it's dead. So we can consume dead fish, in other words, we can consume dead locusts. And this is what the Prophet has actually also explained in one of his narratives in Sunan of Nisa. It says that which means its water is pure and its maita is not forbidden. So which means that dead animals, or dead sea animals, to be precise, they are not prohibited, because the word maita cannot be spoken of them. So we need to understand that. And on a very similar note, we have to understand that usage is something which can only govern our understanding of the language. And if we start analyzing a language on the basis of its literal meaning and its roots, this is something that would take us way beyond the correct interpretation. And I can give you this reference from Shatibi, one of the very outstanding jurists of his time. He belonged to Spain in the 8th century, and this is exactly what he said, that it is the usage of the word which would be given prior attention in its interpretation and not its literal meaning. So exactly the same thing you can find that Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has iterated here, and of course this is a very important principle of language itself. Next, the thing which has been prohibited is, of course, blood. And I've already explained this, that blood is something which can only be consumed by a person who is a beast or a savage, and a person who would consume blood is bound to have the effect of that consumption. So for that very reason, blood has also been prohibited. But remember, as we have seen from the verse, that the words which have been spoken of this type of blood, the expression which has been used is daman masfuhan, which means flowing blood, blood which gushes forth, which actually tells us that as far as that part of the blood is concerned, which remains within the veins or the arteries of an animal, which might get stuck to the meat, if you consume that, if you cook that, then that shall not be that shall not come under the label of prohibition. So this is the second thing which has been delineated. The third thing is the swine or the pig. Now the pig, of course, is something which could have always raised this question whether it is prohibited or not. Why? The reason is that, you see, what has happened is that generally carnivores, meat-eating animals, which tear up the flesh of their prey, they are prohibited, because tearing up the flesh through your sharp teeth or through your tentacles, that creates that image of beastliness. On the other hand, animals which are herbivores, which eat grass, vegetation, they have generally been allowed. Now, the question here is that in most cases, we have a very distinct distribution or a very distinct category of herbivores and carnivores in this regard. But there is one animal, which is the swine or the pig, which could have created confusion because it has both properties. It's a carnivore also, it's a herbivore also. It eats meat as well, and at the same time, like the sheep and the goat, it also consumes vegetation. So in other words, it also has a beastly nature, and it also has the nature of animals which are more appropriate for eating, like for example the cow or the goat. So the question was that how should we treat this pig? Should we class it amongst the carnivores, or should we class it among the herbivores which eat vegetation? And this, of course, would have been a question that would have always created debate amongst scholars and amongst people, that, well, one could have said that its carnivorous nature is more prevalent on its herbivorous nature, and vice versa as well. But the Quran here gave its verdict and said, well, although it also eats vegetation like other normal animals which are appropriate for eating, but its carnivorous nature is dominant over its herbivorous nature, and so therefore it has also been prohibited. So precisely this is the reason why the animal called swine is prohibited. So basically we have to understand that the reason for prohibiting animals in general is that beastliness, is that savagery which is present in those forms of animal, those sorts of animal. So of course, blood is something which we can clearly see has that savagery in itself when we consume it. A dead animal also, because the blood still is stuck in its veins, is classified in the same category. And animals, of course, which are beasts, I mean, they are beasts in the form that they are carnivores and they tear open the flesh of their prey. They have also been prohibited because, as I said, that the reason is that whatever you consume, that consumption has an effect on your own lifestyle. Now, the fourth thing which has been prohibited is matruk tasmiyah, is the Arabic term. Matruk tasmiyah means that you give up tasmiyah, that you do not pronounce the word of God while you slaughter that animal. So this is again something which the Almighty says that it is forbidden, because when you dedicate an animal to someone, some other deity, for example, or some other person or being, that would open the doors of polytheism, that you're dedicating an animal to someone else. So life is something which can only be taken, even if that is of an animal. Of course, human life cannot be even thought of being taken. But if you can take the life of an animal also, only if you seek God's permission. And the reason or the way that you seek God's permission in this regard is that you take His name at the time of slaughter. So when you say Bismillah Allahu Akbar, which is the takbir, you are actually seeking God's permission that yes, if I'm taking the animal's life, it is because it is at your behest. Otherwise, I'm not even authorized to take the life of an animal. So this is the reason that animals which are slaughtered in someone else's name, they are prohibited, because it opens the door to polytheism. And on this very principle, the Quran has also prohibited some other things. So you see, I have been all along telling you that besides that basic principle in which the Quran upholds, or on which the Quran upholds, is that human guidance regarding the prohibition of animals is something in which it is self-sufficient, except, of course, there are four things which we have just discussed. And in this regard, it has also explained certain things. This is what we call the fiqh al-Quran. And Ustaz Javed Ghamidi has coined this term, that just as you find the Shari'ah being given by the Quran, it also answers certain questions, offers certain clarifications. And these answering of questions and these clarifications are not the Shari'ah per se. They amount to an explanation of that Shari'ah by God Himself. And this is what He has classified as the fiqh al-Quran, or how the Quran actually explains certain things. So precisely on this basis, it has explained some other things which of course are tantamount to taking someone other's name at the time of slaughter. So the verse that we studied earlier on, Surah Maida's third verse, it has these words as well. وَمَا زُبِحَ عَلَى النُّصُبِ وَأَن تَسْتَقْسِمُوا بِالْأَزْلَامِ ذَلِكُمْ فِسْقٌ. And what is slaughtered in the stone altars, and forbidden also is the division of meat by rifling with arrows. This is an act of disobedience. So this is something which happened in Arabs in the times of Prophet Muhammad before his advent also, that animals would be slaughtered at altars, at stone altars of mausoleums of other people like saints. And similarly, there would be raffling of arrows in which meat would be gambled, and the meat that person would win as a result of that gambling would be distributed among the poor people. So this raffling of arrows was also prohibited, because of course this is something which is akin to taking something, taking the name of someone other than God. Another important thing which the Quran has again offered as its own fiqh, as its own explanation of its original Sharia, which we know is also something which has been handed down by the established Sunnah of the prophets of God. That is that even if no name is taken while slaughtering an animal, that animal is also prohibited. So what the Quran is telling us is that positively the name of God has to be taken whenever you slaughter an animal. So not only someone else's name should not be taken, that is something which we have already discussed. And if no name is taken, even then you cannot slaughter an animal, because this is a permission which only God gives. And this is again fiqh al-Quran, the understanding or the interpretation offered by the Quran. In verse 121 of Surah Anam, the words are وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا مِمَّا لَمْ يُذْكَرِ اسْمُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَإِنَّهُ لَفِسْقٌ وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ لِيُجَادِلُوكُمْ وَإِنْ أَطَعْتُمُوهُمْ إِنَّكُمْ لَمُشْرِكُونَ. And eat not that animal on which Allah's name has not been pronounced at the time of its slaughter, for this is fisk. And if even Allah's name has not been pronounced, for that is fisk. And certainly the devils do inspire their friends to dispute with you in this matter as well. So be informed that if you obey them, then you would indeed be polytheists. So things in which no name has been taken, the name of God has been not taken, are equally prohibited. And again, as I said, this is something we have to understand with regard to the taking of God's name is concerned. So as far as animals are concerned, which we hunt, for example, there is an instance in which we train animals and we start hunting them. So that is also a corollary which has been dealt with by Ustaz Javed Ghamidi in his book. So he says that the same prohibition applies for a slaughtered animal or prey on which, although the name of Allah is taken, but the person who takes this name does not believe in God or subscribes to polytheism by associating other deities with him. For this very reason, besides Muslims themselves, the Quran has only allowed animals slaughtered by the people of the book, since they originally subscribed to monotheism. So because of this polytheistic practice, because of the fact that you cannot slaughter an animal in someone else's name, save God's name, he says he has made this ijtihad, he has actually made this analogy, I would say, or made this qiyas, which tells us that if a person who slaughters that animal is not someone who subscribes to monotheism, he's not a Muslim, or he's not from among the people of the book, and he's a polytheist, he openly subscribes to polytheism. If that person slaughters an animal, then that too would not be allowed, because you cannot make a difference or discriminate between polytheism, which of course is a result of the fact that you are slaughtering that animal without taking God's name, or the person himself who is slaughtering that animal is someone who is indulging in polytheism because he himself is a professed polytheist. So this is an important analogy that he has made. And actually the people of the book are the only exception besides Muslims, because they adhere to monotheism. And we find that the Quran telling us, Al-yawma uhilla lakum at-tayyibat wa ta'amul lazina utul kitaba hillul lakum wa ta'amukum hillul lahum. All clean things have this day been made lawful to you, and the food to whom the people of the book was given is lawful to you and you for them, or you to them. So you see, the reason that the food of the people of the book is made lawful for us is their subscription to monotheism, which is something which has to be understood. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the fact, and we've already discussed this earlier on, that the concession that has been given, that we discussed earlier on, of course, is important to note that unless, a person who is given this concession, of course, if he is pushed, he can only utilize his concession when he is pushed, when he's undergoing compelling circumstances, and unless he indulges in craving for that meat which is prohibited, or he crosses the limit, that should not be the case. So the Quran says, فَمَنِ اسْتُرَّ فِي مَخْمَسَةٍ غَيْرَ مُتَجَانِفٍ لِلْإِثْمِ. He who is constrained by hunger to eat what is forbidden without inclination to showing sin. So we find Allah forgiving and merciful. So if you have to eat something which is prohibited, it should not be with the willingness of the heart. It should not be because you're inclined to do it. And of course, this is in line with the fact that you're just being compelled to do it. You would not like to do it, but you have to do it because you would like to survive. Now, at the very end of this talk, in which Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, we're talking about his concept of the dietary laws of the Quran. An important thing to note is that as far as the things which are prohibited are concerned, we have to understand that this prohibition only relates to their consumption, to their eating. If they have some other use, it is perfectly all right. Just to give you an example, consumption of alcohol is prohibited. But if that alcohol is, for example, used as a scent, as a perfume which you spray on your body, you cannot say that this is something which is prohibited. And therefore, when we see businesses thriving and shopkeepers saying that we have halal perfumes, it is a mockery of what of our understanding, because you have to understand that what is forbidden is their consumption, is their eating. If you have some other use for that particular proscribed thing, that is perfectly fine. And we find this from the words or the mouth of the Prophet himself. Once when he chanced by a dead animal, he actually asked this question, that why is this dead animal lying there, and why is it not being used for purposes like making it useful its hide or its skin? And people said, well, it's dead. The Prophet said, well, if it's dead, you should not eat it. But what about some of the other uses it might have? So this narrative that you see from the Sahih of Imam Muslim being displayed before you is exactly what the Prophet said. And he said this about a dead animal, and he said that, well, if you see that dead goat that he passed by, and people did not make use of it, he said, well, you just can use it for other purposes. If you're not eating the goat, that's fine, because that is prohibited. But you can always use it for other purposes, which gives us this principle that only consumption, which means our consumption with our mouths, is something which has been prohibited regarding these proscribed items. Other uses of these 4 or 3 items which we have mentioned are perfectly allowed. Finally, viewers, Ustaz Javed Ahmed Ghamidi has also written about the tazkiyah, or what exactly is meant by the tazkiyah, or what exactly is the right form of slaughter which is allowed. So we just discussed the fact that earlier on the Quran has just described the things which have been proscribed, and in one of the verses which we discussed earlier on, Surah Ma'idah, the words which it has used is illa ma zakkaytum, and the zakah here is with a zal, with a za, not a za, not with a zay. So tazkiyah with a zay is purification, but tazkiyah with a zal is slaughtering an animal in a way that all its blood gushes forth. So the only form in which an animal is allowed to you is that you slaughter it in a way that you do tazkiyah. And the tazkiyah is the same as the word zibh, which means that you slaughter an animal from its jugular vein in a way that the blood gushes forth, and as a result, this process cleanses the body of the animal from blood. Only that blood will now remain in the body of an animal which gets stuck to the meat. So that is okay. But all the blood is now drained away from the body of the animal. And therefore, there is no reason to call such an animal to be a maita. So tazkiyah is the only form of slaughter that makes a dead animal to be allowed to you, because you're not actually, what you're doing is you're actually killing that animal in a specific way, which does not render it to be a maita. In the case of a camel, a different term is used, and that is nahar, and most of you would have heard this term. So just as the word zibh is used for goats and for sheep or for cows, the word nahar is used for big animals, like, for example, the camel. And the purpose is the same, that you cut open the jugular vein or the life vein of that animal, and the blood actually oozes out. In fact, it rushes and gushes out, and all of it is drained. And so therefore, we have to understand that. The Prophet has also said that it's not essential that you slaughter something exactly from the place that you do it. For example, you do it from its live vein. It could be some other. I mean, you could use it from, you could slaughter that animal from some other place as well. So this narrative that you can see, which is being displayed before you, exactly explains this. And that is that I'm just going to read the translation. Adi ibn Hatim says, "O Messenger of Allah, is it okay to slaughter a prey with a stone or a piece of wood if the prey is at hand and we do not have a knife to slaughter it?" So if you use something else, some sharp thing instead of a knife, the Prophet said, drain out the blood with whatever you have and take the name of God on it. So it's not essential that you're always using a knife. It's perfectly okay that if you use it, if you use something else. Now, in this regard, the Quran has also taken up one more thing, and that is that if you use trained animals to hunt animals, the Quran says this is perfectly okay. And especially in the case of dogs and in the case of or other beasts which have been trained for this purpose, the Quran tells us that if that beast or that dog is let loose on the prey, in a way that before you let loose the animal, you say Bismillah Allahu Akbar with your own mouth, and then you let loose and unleash that animal. It goes and catches that its prey, and then you find that prey alive. And if it is slaughtered by the teeth of that animal, you find it alive, and then if it is not found alive, I mean, if the animal has already the trained animal has already cut it open through its mouth, and it's fine. However, it should not have consumed it for its own self. This is what the Quran tells us. It should have preserved it for its master. So the words used by the Quran are, يَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا أُحِلَّ لَهُمْ قُلْ أُحِلَّ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَمَا عَلَّمْتُم مِّنَ الْجَوَارِحِ مُكَلِّبِينَ تُعَلِّمُونَهُنَّ مِمَّا عَلَّمَكُمُ اللَّهُ فَكُلُوا مِمَّا أَمْسَكْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ وَاذْكُرُوا اسْمَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ سَرِيعُ الْحِسَابِ. They ask you what is lawful to you. Say, all good things are lawful to you, as well as the prey of the beasts you have taught, training them as Allah has taught you. So eat of what they caught for you, or what they catch for you. And before you let loose the beast to catch the prey, pronounce upon it the name of God, and have fear of God. Swift is he in his account. So, in other words, what we have to do is that if that beast has caught that animal, that trained beast or the trained animal has caught your prey, as long as it has not consumed it for itself, you can use that animal as long as you unleash that trained animal which is used for hunting by pronouncing the words Bismillah Allahu Akbar. So at the time of release of that hunting animal, you have to pronounce those words. Precisely, this is what the Prophet has said in one of his narratives of Sunan Nasa'i. It says, when you release your dog to catch the prey, take the name of Allah while doing so. If you then see that it has not killed the prey, slaughtered it in the prescribed way, and take Allah's name while slaughtering it. So this shows that if that animal has cut open its prey and the animal has died, it is fine. In other words, the teeth of that trained animal will act as the knife, so to speak. And if it passes away as a result of that, it is killed, then you have already said the takbir when you have unleashed that trained dog. And if that dog has now killed the prey, as long as it has not used it for himself, then it is perfectly halal. However, if the animal is found, it's found alive, that what you can do is you can then, when you reach that place where you find that slaughtered animal or that hunted animal lying there, you can then slaughter it for your own self and then, of course, consume it. So this is what the Prophet has said. If you then see that it has not killed the prey, slaughter it in the prescribed way and take Allah's name while slaughtering it. If it has killed the prey but did not take a bite, if it has killed the prey but did not take a bite, that you can eat it, since it has preserved it for you. However, if it has eaten from the prey, then such a prey is forbidden for you, because the beast of prey has in this case preserved it for itself. And if you see other dogs besides yours who have also killed the prey, then do not eat from it, and since you do not know which of the dogs has actually killed the prey. So this is just a caution which the hadith is telling us in its near the end. Otherwise, virtually by all means and by all intents and purposes, if the trained dog or the trained animal has killed the prey, it is fine. It would be perfectly halal as long as that dog was let loose by the words of Bismillah Allahu Akbar. And if it has not killed it, also not consumed it, then when you reach the place where the animal is lying there, you just slaughter it for your own self, and then you can consume it. And as a side to this, I can also say that look how the Quran tells us that this is a discipline of knowledge which God has taught us to do in this regard. And So therefore, we have to understand that if we do the taskiyah of an animal, taskiyah with the zal, which means slaughter in a proper way, then whether you use a knife, whether you use a rifle, whether you use a revolver or any other thing, as long as these requirements are fulfilled, it is absolutely fine. So viewers and folks, this brings me to an end to presenting the views of my teacher, Javed Ahmed Ghamidi, regarding the dietary laws. Just to sum up once again what we have discussed here. First, we have to understand that as far as the prohibition of edibles and drinks are concerned, this is something which the Almighty has already ingrained in ourselves. We already know we don't eat things like lions and vultures and tigers because they are not made for these things. I mean, they're not made for eating, and they are all beasts and savage animals, so to speak. And as far as the Quran is concerned, it has only given guidance on those four edibles which we just discussed, because there could have been some confusion, because there could have been some debate regarding these four things. And this is exactly with line with what the Sharia, the temperament of the Sharia, in which it only guides human intellect where it is liable to falter, only where it is liable to falter. Otherwise, it lets it take the decision itself. And then, of course, we also saw some of the explanations of Prophet, what exactly in this regard is to be upheld in all circumstances, and how we have to also consider the word maita to have a linguistic connotation. Similarly, we have also to understand that as far as the concession regarding these animals is concerned, which are prohibited, they can be consumed in compelling circumstances. And also a very important thing that we studied, that things which are prohibited, they are prohibited for eating only. Their other uses are absolutely permissible. And finally, we studied what exactly the word taskiyah means. The word taskiyah is different from tazkiyah, which means a purification of the soul, or for our own deeds and practices. The word tazkiyah with a zal actually means slaughtering an animal such that all its blood gushes forth. And we also studied the wisdom behind the prohibition of these four edibles, or these four items. So this brings me to an end in presenting his views, and inshallah, as we go along, we'll be discussing some of his other views which he has presented in his book Meezan. And now I am available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem, for this comprehensive lecture on dietary laws. Before we start taking questions, I'd like to let the participants know that the priority is going to be given to topic-specific questions, and then we'll continue on with non-topic specific questions. So, Riaz, please go ahead. You're up first.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Dr. It has been argued that it is in human nature that you can differentiate between the tayyib and the khabith. But when we look at the Chinese culture, they eat all kind of things. So is it that,
Right.
is it culture plays a role in there?
So the question was asked that if this innate guidance is so clear, why is it that the Chinese and many Eastern nations, they have a different view of our dietary laws, and they consume a lot of things which generally human beings do not consume? So I started answering this question by saying that when you pick up a sample regarding what people do or they don't do, you just don't concentrate on a particular area of the globe, and that too for a particular period of time. So if we take the whole humankind as a sample in this regard, we'll find that ever since the creation of Adam, and of course after him we had all of the prophets of God, and a very big and a huge chunk of Muslim of religious history in which prophets of God came. If you count humanity ever since that era, from that period right up till now, you'll find that this is an exception which the Chinese and some of the other nations indulge in. So if they do this, they are actually, the reasons could be several. This could be because of perversion of human nature. This could be because some of the external influential and environmental factors as well that we can analyze. But if people say that why is it that their innate guidance is not guiding them and the way it is guiding the rest of humankind, the answer, as I said, would be that humankind as a whole has to be taken in this regard. And if we take it as a whole, ever since the inception of mankind right up to today, you will find, I could say, if I can go on and say that maybe even 90% or 95% of humankind has always remained averse to eating such things as these Chinese eat. So if their nature is telling them something different, it's an exceptional case. It's a case of perversion, and that perversion is something which has its origins in a lot of things which can be analyzed and discussed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Our next question comes from Bismat Tirmizi Ahmed. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. My question was, how do we categorize langars at mazars and the food that people distribute at the barsi of a loved one? These are distributed amongst the poor for the most part, which is what explains it, and that's how people explain it. But the idea behind the food distribution is for sabab of the departed. So how would this fit into the categories?
So, I mean, if the food is not dedicated to any other person, because of course Muslims would not dedicate to a deity, they could dedicate it for the dead person or to some other saint. If that is not the case, and if it's just a pure question of feeding the poor in such places, or in the case of a deceased person's death, I mean, we cannot say that it is prohibited. So it all depends on the intention or the way we present it. If there is no such thing involved, if you're not dedicating the food to any other person or deity, it's absolutely fine. But if you think that you are doing this by dedicating it to the dead person or to someone else, then we should abstain from consuming it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Saleem.
Next up, we have Akram Bhatti. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
अभी आपने फरमाया कि अगर कोई बंदा है जो कि अल्लाह पे यकीन नहीं रखता और तो उसका जो स्लाटर किया हुआ और सही तरीके से स्लाटर करे तो हम नहीं खा सकते। तो फिर जो आजकल ये क्रिश्चियन वाले किताब कहते हैं वो तो सीधे सीधे शिरक करते हैं। वो जब ईसा अलैहिस्सलाम को अल्लाह का बेटा मानते हैं तो फिर उनके साथ उनका कैसे खा सकते हैं आप?
So I think I answer this question by saying that even though the people of the book, they are incriminated with various forms of polytheism, but they still subscribe to monotheism. And this was the case even at the time of the revelation of the Quran. The Christians of those times still called themselves, still had this belief that Jesus is the Son of God. But in spite of that, God allowed it. Why? Because you see, when they say that he's the Son of God, they don't interpret it to mean that it's a form of polytheism. They say that this is monotheism and they explain it in a certain way. The Quran does not accept this explanation, but because they themselves say that they are monotheists, the Quran has accepted that. So we eat their food because primarily they are monotheists. And their example is the example of a Muslim who is a person who subscribes to Tawheed, but still he goes to shrines and prostrates before saints, and he starts invoking that saint that please pray for me that God accepts my wish. So you see, the case of a Muslim is also no different. He might subscribe to monotheism, but he might deviate and follow certain polytheistic practices. So the case of a Christian is also the same. That primarily they believe in one God, but that belief in one God has that deviation. It has a wrong ring to it. And the Quran actually accepted this when it said that, because you see that the Christians of the times of the Prophet himself, they believed Jesus to be the Son of God. And in spite of that, the Quran allowed their meat to be consumed. Because, as I said, they were primarily monotheists. And they had deviated into practices of polytheism, just as Muslims are primarily monotheists, but they do certain acts of polytheism. So doing certain acts of polytheism does not make a person polytheist. It only makes him a deviant monotheist.
Just to clarify my mind, I'm going to ask you one little question again. Okay, if or now people who live in Europe or America, we don't eat that meat because once it's not slaughtered at all. If they slaughter it, then that confusion would come in place. I think what you are mentioning.
Right.
But not
because when you are in such countries, the reason for your not consuming such meat is because the name of God has not been invoked. So that is another important distinction that has to be made. So you see, the distinctions are three. The name of God has to be positively taken. The way that you slaughter that animal has to be in a way that all the blood gushes out. And thirdly, the person who slaughters should be primarily a monotheist. So these are the three conditions which have to be met for halal slaughter. The three
Some
conditions.
people over here said
Person,
they go to Jews shops and
Yeah.
they say that's okay because Jews.
Yes, it is okay because you see the Jews they when they eat kosher, they invoke the name of God.
Yes.
To the best of my understanding, so precisely for this reason, the name of God is taken. The slaughter is done in the correct way, so the blood gushes out. And of course, Jews are monotheists as well. So always remember that there are these three conditions. Whenever they are fulfilled, you will say that the slaughter is a halal slaughter and it can be consumed.
Jazakallah khair, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. I had a question of my own, and this is like related to, there are people that eat all kinds of meat despite being Muslims. They don't care if it's dhabiha or not. And I know that if you go to someone's place and they know that you only eat dhabiha, then you should assume, in goodwill that they will offer you what's halal. But I've had instances where some of my friends have offered me things and then it turned out that they weren't really halal. Or at least I didn't see them as being halal. And so in those situations, with Ramadan coming, is it okay to question whoever's house you're going to if what they're presenting you with is halal, or should you abstain from doing that?
I think if they themselves say that they are offering halal meat, it is enough that you, trust them. In case of a breach of trust, maybe, or maybe if you are slightly doubtful, you can always ask that, we are bound by our religion to eat certain things and not eat certain things. And I think people respect this a lot. So, in the first case, it's perfectly fine to trust them. But it could be the case that by trusting them, because they themselves might not be knowing whether they are doing the right thing or not, and later on you get to know. So even if you ask them that this is how you are required to eat certain things, I don't think it should be a problem, and it should be a cause of any consternation or bother. However, if there is, this is not possible, then I think if you just trust the person on his word that yes, we are offering halal meat and we know what halal meat is, I think that should be sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Moving on to non-topic specific questions. So this one comes from the chat, and it says, I have a question regarding Surah Al-Fatiha in connection to the term Rabbil Alameen. And the question is, Alameen is Al-Alameen is generally interpreted as the worlds or the universe, but the plural of Al-Alam or for the worlds is Al-Awalim, not Al-Alameen. And so in Arabic, all of these words that end with "een" correspond to human beings, specifically to male human beings, but in general, they could also be for any gender, for example, Muslimin, Sajidin, and so on. And so from this interpretation, taken together, can we say that Rabbil Alameen specifically refers to all human beings, whether dead or alive, instead of the world or the universe?
First, I think this is not correct to say that the plural alimun or alameen is not correct, and only the plural is awalim. This is common knowledge that alameen is equally a plural word. And the second important thing is that in the Arabic language, in classical Arabic, plurals are not always used to connote multiple entities. They are also used to connote the vastness or the unboundedness of something. So, for example, Rabbul Mashariq wal Magharib, as you can see in the Quran, that He is the Lord of the Easts and the Wests. The Mashariq is the plural of Mashriq, Magharib is the plural of Maghrib. Similarly, you see words like Hasarat, Hasarat means regret, but it is used in the plural, and doesn't mean a lot of shame. It only, of course, reflects the abundance of something. So we have to understand that in classical Arabic language, first, as I said, I think I need to correct the person who has asked this, that alimun is also an equally plural word of the word alim. And secondly, in Arabic, classical Arabic, plurals are not always meant for multiplicity. They are also meant to connote the vastness. The word Rabbul Alameen, as a result, would mean the Lord of this vast universe, this expansive universe. Instead of translating it to be the Lord of the worlds or the Lord of the universe, all the universes, The connotation of the word Alameen here is the vastness of the expanse of what God has created.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Dr. Saleem. Next up, we have Riaz Khan. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. We know from the Sunnah of Prophet ﷺ that whenever he traveled or during the rain, he combined Zuhr and Asr. So what does these Imams play the role, like the Imam Shafi'i and so on? So according to Shafi'i, you can't do it. According to Hanafi, you can do it, type of deal. So when established that the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah is there, how do you distinguish between one Imam's decision versus the other?
This is on the basis of their own principles which they have formulated. So you see, the Hanafis, if they do something, they have their own principles of jurisprudence. For example, they would say that something which should have been done in a way that many people should have reported an incident, but only few people end up reporting that incident, then that thing is not reliable. To give an example, they would say if there was a fire somewhere and only a couple of people report that, maybe one person, whereas there was a whole population which was who was witnessing that fire or affected by it. So in that case, if one person says that it was this event had happened, then we would not believe that person, because this is against common sense that all the rest would not say so. So similarly, the Shafi'i and the Hanabilas and the Malikis, I'm just giving you one example, they have formulated their principles of jurisprudence as per which they interpret the whole practice of the Prophet. Another example is, for example, the Malikis, or the people who follow the Maliki law, for example, in North Africa, in Spain, they would see what the Prophet, when he shortened his prayer, they would typically say that it was after 40 miles maybe, or after 30 miles, or whatever distance that they interpret. The reason is that they rely on certain narratives in which the Prophet shortened his prayer after such a mileage that he had traveled. But you see other Imams doing it on for a lesser period of time, for example, 9 miles, or for maybe 5 days or 7 days. So each of these jurists, they formulate their own interpretations as a result of their principles, which I just referred to. And for one, these principles would say that we have to look upon the Prophet, or one of these of the Prophet, which is stronger than the rest, which tells us, well, this is the time period for shortening the prayers. We cannot do it beyond that time period. And this is the extent of the mileage that has to be traveled to shorten the prayer. And the other, for example, jurists would, on the other hand, say that some other narratives which are stronger than what you have interpreted, then they don't refer to, let's say, 40 miles or 50 miles. They say it's 9 miles or 11 miles. So either they will rely on a hadith, which to them would be more powerful than the person, or than the hadith which the other Imam has relied upon, or, as I said, they would have some of their own principles. So this is basically a line of reasoning which just is consequential to the principles that they have formulated. And there are subtle differences regarding the principles that have been formulated by all these four giant people.
So would the same principle apply to the prayers when Prophet ﷺ, as it said, that he combined the Asr and Zuhr together?
I think if you ask me, as I said, if you ask me the way I've studied it, I think that it's a question of your personal preference. I mean, the Prophet himself, if you look at various narratives, he shortened his prayer on different occasions for different distances, because basically it was his personal discomfort. On some occasions, he felt that discomfort after 10 miles. On certain other occasions, he felt it after 30 miles. So instead of relating it to the discomfort, people started relating it to the distance which he had traveled. So the essence of this whole matter is, it's not the distance that you have traveled, it's the discomfort which has actually inflicted you. So as long as you feel that discomfort, and what do I mean by discomfort? Discomfort means the discomfort of the journey itself. When you're traveling, of course, you're not in a very comfortable position. You have certain things that you, in normal circumstances, that you would not have. So as long as you feel the discomfort of the journey, you are authorized to shorten the prayer. And as I said, it's not just a journey, it could be other reasons as well. So discomfort could be because of sickness, it could be because of any other valid reason, something which is out of the normal. So when something which is out of the normal happens, it warrants or gives the person the authority. It could be subjective, of course, to decide for himself or herself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. Next up, we have Bismat Tirmizi Ahmed again. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saleem. I was last night I was listening to your lecture on the first revelation, and what I have understood from it is that the idea of Ghar Hira somehow does not fit into the narrative. Now, of course, all my life I've believed that Ghar Hira is where the revelation happened, and then so many other people who I speak to, I feel it's so hard to convince people. My question to you is, in Christianity, we see a lot of Greek mythology kind of that mythology bled into the belief. Is there any history of some cave where revelations happened and that's how it crept into storytelling? If that did not really happen and it's fictional, and the prophet only got his revelations, at ground level in Makkah or Medina. Is there any references? Because I was trying to find them last night, but is there anything you can point me to towards as far as the reference of Ghar Hira is concerned?
There are no such references. The only reference is that narrative of Bukhari. But as far as the prophet stationing himself in the cave of Hira is concerned, we do find in the Sirat of Ibn Ishaq, one of the foremost biographies of the prophet, in which the prophet would go and do itikaf in the Ghar Hira. And that is a totally different thing from the Quran being revealed to him. So it does seem that because the Kaaba or the Baytullah was, it had a number of idols in the times of when the Prophet was living in Mecca. And so perhaps it was to his distaste that he would go and do itikaf there. So we do have this news from the biography of Ibn Ishaq, which tells us that the Prophet, and even before the Prophet, his grandfather and the Quraysh in general, they had this tradition that the Ghar Hira or the cave of Hira would be used for this isolation, for this stationing of in isolation is concerned that we do in itikaf. So they did this itikaf in the cave of Hira, and that is all that we know. But revelation of the Quran is something which is actually something that we got to know from that narrative of Imam Bukhari, which we see in Bukhari, the Sahih of Bukhari. Otherwise, this is something that will not feature. It will not feature anywhere else.
Okay, so basically, then the understanding is that he did go for itikaf there, but he did not.
He did go for itikaf, but he never received. Yeah,
okay.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all of the questions today. Before we end the session early, I'd like to let the participants know that starting Ramadan, Dr. Saleem is going to have a daily series starting 9 p.m. Pakistan time. And so we won't be continuing with these weekend sessions until after Ramadan, inshallah.